right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, again, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. My name is State Senator Ethan Corson. This is, I don't know, I've kind of lost track, but this is like our 50-something consecutive town hall. So, I really, really appreciate you being here. You know, I was thinking as I was driving here, we used to do these outdoors at Harmon Park, which was really fun, and I really enjoyed being outside. But on days like today, I was really glad that we were able to do this inside in the air conditioning, and I'm sure that you are as well. So grateful for the Powell Center has been a really, really wonderful host to us for a number of years for these town halls. I'll start by sharing because we do have some new faces here, which is awesome. And thank you for being here, especially if you are, if this is your first time attending. But our district boundaries for Senate District 7, we represent kind of a big rectangle of northeast Johnson County. So we start on the Johnson County side of the Wyandotte-Johnson border on 47th Street, and we go south to about 95th Street. And then we go from state line to about 6 blocks west of Metcalf. So kind of represent that chunk of Northeast Johnson County. I will say, you know, one thing I don't know, so you can ask, but I really don't know, is what the Chiefs or the Royals are going to do. I have no information other than what has been in the publicly reported in the papers. So I will start by saying, you could torture me, and I truthfully don't have an answer for where the Chiefs or the Royals are going to be playing in 2031, I think it is. So I will say that, you know, kind of to start on a sad note, since we met last month, we've had 2 incidences of political violence that have really both, I think, affected me personally and a number of other folks. We had a young woman who went to Shawnee Mission East, who grew up in Prairie Village. Her name was Sarah Milgram. She was murdered outside the Capitol Museum in Washington, D.C., Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., and I know her family. Her parents were in my campaign video last year, so I knew her family. I know her family, and it was really terrible. We were actually at Disney with our kids when this happened, and we sort of heard the news that there had been this horrific murder of these 2 people outside the Capitol Jewish Museum, and that was obviously terrible enough in and of itself. And then it was a couple hours later that I started getting these text messages that it was actually Sarah from Prairie Village, and started realizing all of the connections and the relationships that we had. So I both went to Sarah's funeral, which was on a Tuesday, and then I went to her parents' house the following day for another memorial service. And it was the single hardest thing that I've done as an elected official, just being around those parents. It's literally every parent's worst nightmare. So we had that unfold. And then, as you all know now, it's, I think, 2 weeks ago, we had the assassination of a state lawmaker in Minnesota and the attempted assassination of another state lawmaker in Minnesota. And I know that nobody here needs to hear this, but we really have to always stand firm against political violence in all forms, from all sides, and just make clear that it is never acceptable in any way, shape, or form against any person or any elected official. I mean, we debate really serious issues where people understandably have very strong feelings. And I think that having strong feelings is natural and a normal part of just American civil discourse and public life. But we do not want to live in a society where political violence becomes the norm. And we saw that in the late 60s. We do not want to enter into another era where we feel like that's ever acceptable. So I just wanted from you to hear from me directly, just that violence is never the answer to any of these disagreements in any way, shape, or form. So it's been a tough month since we last gathered on that front. Kind of move on to the substantive things that have happened. The first thing I'll talk about is we got our May tax collection numbers. And I was called a tax and budget nerd at a couple meetings ago. And I am a member of the Senate Tax Committee. I'm the ranking member of the Senate Tax Committee. And so these numbers were really encouraging. So overall, our May tax receipts were $158 million above what had been projected. So that's 32% above what our nonpartisan projections were, which again, very good news. Our individual income receipts were 85% above the projections. So this is really important because one of the things that we've talked about in previous meetings is that our state is projected to be in a serious deficit as we really get into 2029 is when it really hits. But we have projected sort of an imbalance. We actually have a pretty significant balance on hand right now. But what we've set up through our tax policy, primarily through the income tax cuts that the legislature has passed, that we've set up a system where we are spending about $800 million a year more than we are taking in. So for the first couple years, that actually looks okay because right now our ending balance is pretty strong. But it's really when you get into 2028 and 2029 that, again, the world will probably not look exactly like we predict it to look. So I think it's fair to take all of these projections with a grain of salt. I mean, these are smart people, but they're just doing the best job they have on the information that they have, right? If you were doing these projections in 2018, 2019, you would not have predicted that COVID was coming, right? So all of these things do have some variability in them, but at the same time, they are worth taking into account. So I thought it was really encouraging to see our May numbers be as robust as they were. Frankly, if we are going to not be in a real fiscal crisis in 4 or 5 years, we need to continue to exceed those projections to have things balance out. So again, I thought it was a hopeful sign. I would say that when you talk to experts in the field, you obviously can only extrapolate so much from 1 month, right? So a good sign, but doesn't mean that June, July will necessarily be as robust because some of this is just the timing of when people pay taxes. And so there's, folks who owe these amounts, and some months people decide to pay more of them. Sometimes you collect less. So again, it doesn't mean that at the end of the year that we will necessarily have exceeded projections by 32% by any stretch. But again, a positive sign, so I was certainly glad to see it. The third thing I want to talk about, not really from a partisan perspective at all, but from just a Kansas perspective, is the big, beautiful bill that is going through Congress right now. And I hope you know me well enough that I really don't view this thing through a Democrat or a Republican lens. What I really kind of want to share with you is how this is going to impact Kansas, because I think that's really the lens that I look at this thing through. And I've told people when it comes to Kansas, I'm not pro-Trump. I'm not anti-Trump. If Trump was doing things that I thought would be really good for Kansas, I would be the first person to stand up and say that we should do more of them. So what I've kind of compiled is these are not my facts and figures. These are all from, again, nonpartisan, kind of well-researched, reported sources about what the bill would do to Kansas if it passed in its current form. And I say in its current form because I think that there are more twists and turns to happen. And so this is just the latest information we have based on the most current version of the bill. And normally I don't talk too much about federal issues here at our town hall. I really like to focus on state legislative issues. But the reason this is important for us as state legislators is that ultimately what's going to happen if some of these cuts go through is people will then be looking toward the state legislature and saying, well, can you backfill these cuts? Right? We're losing X amount of money in Medicaid. We're losing Y amount of money towards our food assistant program. We're losing Z amount of money in our student loan program. We now have a number of people who no longer have health insurance. And so I think it is relevant for us to talk about, even though this is a state legislative forum, because certainly when we come back in January, that'll be one of the questions. And as I just shared with you about our state budget, there really is not slack in the state budget for us to necessarily take on really significant expenditures to cover what could be really significant shortfalls. So it's not the case that we just, oh, well, if these cuts go through at the federal level, we can just wave a magic wand and just say, well, we'll just pay it from state dollars. It's really not how it would work. So I kind of compiled what I thought were some of the most important statistics. The first is that 66,000 Kansans, including over 40,000 small business owners and self-employed people, would be paying higher premiums in terms of their health care, because what the bill proposes now is that there are a series of enhanced tax credits for people who get their insurance through the marketplace. And the bill proposes to do away with those enhanced tax credits. So again, that's going to be increased health insurance cost for over 60,000 Kansans that are going to see a healthcare premium increase. Rural hospitals, I think, are probably stand to be the biggest single loser from the bill as it currently is construed. Right now, Kansas, if the bill were passed, would face a $4 billion loss of federal dollars to our rural hospitals. And this would come at a time when over half of our rural hospitals are already, even with those federal dollars flowing in, are already at risk of closure. So this is just a really, really significant potential cut to our rural healthcare system. And I think that the gentleman who runs the hospital in Hutchinson, he put it best. He said, you know, these Medicare cuts, they really don't, Medicare, Medicaid cuts, they really don't save any money at the end of the day. Really what we're just doing is we're pushing people into getting health insurance in the emergency room, which is the most expensive, it's the least efficient, it's the least effective form of healthcare that we could be doing. So at the end of the day, we really don't end up saving much money when we do these significant Medicaid cuts, which is what we're looking at. We're looking at a 15% reduction in total rural Medicaid hospital reimbursement in Kansas. So Kansas would lose, if the bill was passed in its current form, $826 million in Medicaid funds in the first year. That's in the first year. Over 10 years, we would lose $2.8 billion in federal Medicaid funds if the bill passes in its current form. So that's the real impact on rural hospitals. Then when it comes to individual Kansans, as I mentioned earlier, there are projected 13,000 fewer Kansans who would be able to enroll in Medicaid. So then you're talking again about what happens when folks are uninsured, because I've talked to all of our hospitals about this, is when folks are uninsured, it doesn't mean that they don't receive healthcare coverage. It means that they come uninsured to the emergency room. They receive the most expensive form of healthcare that is available, and then in order to try to recoup some of those costs, what hospitals do is they pass it along to everybody else they see that does have health insurance. So all we're talking about really is increased health insurance premiums and increased health insurance costs for all of us, whether you have insurance or whether you don't have insurance. And then in terms of food assistance, Kansas would, if we were going to try to backfill what these changes would propose, it would be $100 million out of the state budget just to maintain the current levels of food assistance, which, let me just say, in Kansas, already as it stands today, are not generous. Okay. So it would be $100 million just to maintain our already fairly paltry food assistance programs for folks who really need that. The child tax credit, we would have 17,000 fewer Kansas kids who would be able to receive the federal child tax credit. And then, as somebody who went through college on student aid, and I'm 43 and I'm almost done paying my student loans, we would have 30,000 Kansas students who would lose all or part of their federal student aid due to potential cuts to that program. So undoubtedly, I think that would mean, the unfortunate reality is, that would mean a lot of Kansas kids who would decide that they're no longer able to continue on in higher education because of the cost. So wanted to share that with folks. I will stop there, be glad to take questions. And again, thank you so much for being here today.
It's always good to follow Ethan. I can just go what he said. So anyway, I'm Jerry Stogsdill. I see a few new people here today, and I represent the 21st District in the Kansas House of Representatives. I'll be in my 10th year when we go back in January. And my three committees that I work on are the Water Committee, Tax Committee, and the Education Committee, the House Education Committee, which is really policy decision making, as opposed to K-12 budget, which deals with the finances for the educational systems here in Kansas. And Ethan does a great job of putting out all these statistics and everything, and it is almost impossible for us to figure out what in the world is going to happen when we get back in January. We've got 6.5 months before we go back to Topeka. I mean, I couldn't tell you what this guy in Washington is going to do tomorrow, let alone 6.5 months from now. So we are dealing with some serious lack of information, and even lack of being able to forecast what is going on in Washington, which will impact us here in Kansas. And as Ethan pointed out, anybody who thinks the decisions that are made in Washington aren't going to have a big impact on Kansas, think again. They're going to have a major impact on Kansas. And it's just the uncertainty. I said, I just talked to my wife this morning, and I said, I'm just afraid we're going to wake up some morning and he's attacked and declared war on Hawaii, that we may need more pineapples. So the Water Committee, again, is what we've done great work on in a very bipartisan way. And we've really started to address the problems of keeping our aquifer viable out in western Kansas. We've talked about keeping our water, our surface water, plentiful here in eastern Kansas, so we have plenty of drinking water and so on. The technology for that is extremely expensive, and we do Johnson County Water District number 1 does a fabulous job with our water supplies here in northeast Kansas, well, in Johnson County. So we're very fortunate in that perspective. But again, with the, I have no idea what kind of environmental issues we're going to have to deal with next year, whether that's going to impact, how it's going to impact water issues across the state. If they cut funding for that, I don't know where we're going to be. So, and then on the tax committee, again, Ethan and I will serve on the interim tax committee. It's going to meet in September, and so far that's all the information we've got. We'll meet in September. That's 2 months away, and no wonder they haven't put out anything as far as what subjects we're going to do, what the dates of the meeting are going to be. We don't know whether it's going to be 1 day or 4 days or what, but I have a feeling that the theme is going to be pretty consistent, and that is, how can we help the most disadvantaged and overtaxed millionaires and billionaires in Kansas. So that seems to be the theme in Topeka, and just like it is in Washington, D.C. And we have got to get people on board with contacting all of our legislators across the state, Republicans, Democrats, everything, and say, look, this cannot go on. I know in Johnson County here, the big issue is obviously property taxes. And we, again, it's so hard to plan and project what we need to do in Topeka in 6.5 months when we have really no idea what kind of funds are going to be coming into Kansas, what we're going to have to do to make up that lack of funding that Ethan was talking about. And so as soon as hopefully next month, I'd have a better understanding maybe of what we're at least going to be talking about in September when we go back for the interim tax committee. The last one, I'm the ranking Democrat on the House Education Committee. So I have a real interest in public education and higher education. And at the end of the session, I went and talked to Susan Estes, who's the chair of the House Education Committee. And Susan will at least listen. And she doesn't vote right, but she at least listens. But we had two-hour discussions about what we're doing with education in the state of Kansas and what we need to do to address several issues that are going to be critical for public education in Kansas over the next few years. One of the biggest ones is that last year were between 1,800 and 1,900 teachers short in Kansas. We had over 1,800 teaching vacancies in the state of Kansas. I know when I taught in Shawnee Mission, we would have one vacancy and we'd have 25 or 30 applicants. Now we can't even get, we're in a lot of parts of the state, we can't even get substitutes. So it's causing a real problem in the state of Kansas, and if it causes problems in the state of Kansas, it causes trouble for our kids. And that's totally unfair. They ought to be a top priority for all of us here in the state of Kansas. So I told Susan I'm going to meet with every educational leader I can think of in the state of Kansas between now and January. I've already started that process. I've met with people from KNEA, and I wanted to talk more about a meeting I had this week with the Kansas Board of Regents. And actually it was the deans of all of the educational colleges in our major universities and colleges across the state of Kansas. It was a Zoom meeting. I had talked to Dr. Debbie Mercer at K-State, who's the Dean of Education up there, suggested that if that would be something that she'd be interested in doing. She called me back a couple days later and said, man, they're very excited about that. We're going to get all the deans together at the Zoom conference that we meet about every other month, and they're very excited to meet with you to talk about these issues. So we had a great discussion for about an hour and 15 minutes this last week on what we can do to help education, help our kids in the state of Kansas. And I had the novel idea, instead of imposing legislation on our educational institutions, it might be a good thing to inquire of them what they need in order to improve our educational facilities and our educational programs for our kids, K through graduate school. So we it was such a good experience that we're going to meet on a regular basis now between now and the session starting again in January. But just some of the things that we discussed this week was the impact the vouchers would have on public education in Kansas, which would be, of course, crippling. And we're going to be fighting those right and left. I have a feeling those are going to be raising their ugly head again first day of the session. And again, it's so hard to plan on this stuff because we don't even know if there's going to be a federal Department of Education when we go back in January. So if that's happening, and they were already talking to me about projects that they're having at our universities and colleges in Kansas, that the funding is drying up or the funding is being revoked So that's going to be something that we have to deal with, especially over the next 6 months before we go back to Topeka. The um, I was literacy is a big thing. We had really good program come up for literacy that we're hoping to install across the state of Kansas for our kids, and a couple of things that are involved with that are real sticking points for me is we have kids on tablets, iPads, starting in kindergarten. And in my opinion, there shouldn't be a kid on an iPad until at least the 5th grade. That's my personal belief. And I've read several studies on the impact of font size and font type for kids who are learning to read. And so they were very interested in pursuing that. I brought it up with them and I said, we have to rely on you guys a lot to come up with solutions for some of these problems that we're going to have. And I said, we need to have you to be more visible and more vocal and more in Topeka to bring those things to the attention of the legislature. And they were on board with that, and hopefully they will continue to be on board with that when we get back to Topeka in January. I looked at some of the programs that they have for kids, and you get a tablet, which is about that big, and you can have a tablet page with 3 different types of fonts, 3 different font sizes. That's okay for us, maybe, but when you're 5 years old and in kindergarten, maybe not so much. I kind of remember when I was in kindergarten, the letters were about that big, and now I still like to see letters about that big, but I don't do anything under 14-point type, I'll tell you that right now. But anyway, they were very interested in that subject, and I know they're going to bring it up with their faculties and so on, and I suggested that these things that we're talking about today maybe ought to be assigned to some of the faculties at KU and K-State and Wichita and Emporia and Pittsburgh and Fort Hays, and Washburn University was also in on this discussion. So anyway, the one thing also that I brought up my very first year, and I'll have it on their desk again in January, is due process rights for teachers. That, again, I talked to them and they agreed. I said, I don't know how you recruit a single teacher west of Manhattan. It's come to our little town. We want you to buy a house. We want you to become part of the community. We want you to do a good job teaching our kids. And oh, by the way, our hospital may be closing, but don't worry about it. It's only 85 miles to the nearest hospital. And that's real convenient when it snows. So, and then, by the way, there'd be no job security, basically, because without due process, we can fire you for anything we want. And due process, the bill that I proposed, still has a 3-year trial period for teachers. They can still be fired. If you can't figure out if a teacher is going to be any good in 3 years, then you've got bad administrators. You may not have bad teachers. So I'll be bringing that bill up again. We need to look at what we teach in college, too, in my opinion. Are we teaching our teachers the right things? And I think it's good to have those kinds of discussions every now and then because the world is changing, and we need to make sure that our teachers are getting the best possible education that they can get in order to teach our kids. But when we have 1,800 vacancies in our public schools, you can have the best programs under the sun, but if you don't have the teachers to teach it, what good is that? So anyway, they were interested in that. One of the other things that we've discussed quite a bit in the House Education Committee is respect for teachers. I'm sick and tired of these groups coming into our education committees in Topeka and telling us how bad our teachers are and how bad our public schools are. Now, these are the people, also the same people that come in and talk about how good vouchers are for kids and so on. But I've talked to a lot of teachers who've said that's a big problem, and I may not stay in education that much longer because I'm sick and tired of being vilified for everything that's wrong with education. And I think that disrespect for our teachers is a problem and is one of the major reasons why we do have a problem with filling those 1,800 spots and so on. So that's going to be a topic of discussion over the next 6 months. And then also, I'm very concerned about lowering teacher certification standards. I mean, you know, we're in such a position now that we've had to basically lower standards in order to just get enough bodies in the classrooms. And that is a real concern for me. And so I think that we have to keep our certification standards high for the kids that teach our kids in the classroom. And all of these things, we all know that they're problems, but I think this first time I think that they've said that a legislators really sit down with them as a group and said, let's work together to come up with remedies for these things. And I told them, I said, I asked them to put together, I want to have 3 bills come out of your discussions that I can introduce in January that would make your life easier, would make your life more effective, would make your programs and so on at higher education more effective in teaching teachers how to work with our kids and so on. And I also told them I think it's going to be extremely important that you show up in Topeka. Their lobbyists do a good job for them in Topeka, but their lobbyists are not deans of education. And I said, I think it would be very important for you guys, every last one of you, to show up and hold a press conference right there in the rotunda in the Capitol building and talk about higher education, talk about teaching in Kansas, and how we're going to improve that for our kids and our grandkids and generations going forward. Because what we do now is going to impact all of that. This is a critical time for public education. I've never seen such an attack on public education that we're going through right now. So anyway, they seemed, the other thing, of course, was trans kids. And, you know, that's an issue that shouldn't even be on the table. But that's one of the biggest political issues that the Republicans use in Topeka against public education all the time. And I won't even go into it again. I think I've talked about it here before, the fairness in women's sports thing that we dealt with last session. And when I pointed out that out of the 136,000 kids registered with the Kansas State Activities Association, there were 11 transgender kids. And 7 of them were boys transitioning to girl, or 4 were transitioning boys to girls, and 7 girls transitioning to boys, and none of them played sports. So I'm not exactly sure where the fairness was in women's sports here, but anyway, that's going to be an issue that they bring up. You know, they're attacking trans kids and trans people all over the country as it is. And the other thing is going to be merit pay. And we've had people on the House Education Committee. We had 5 new members this year, and oh my gosh, that was going to be that solve every problem we had. If we want better teachers, we just give merit pay. Well, good luck with that. And I pointed out, and I think I may have pointed this out before, but I told him, I said, who's the most meritorious teacher? The teacher in Shawnee Mission who has kids that go home to good food every night and computers and 1 or 2 parents at least, and tutors if they need it and that sort of thing. And that teacher gets a kid into all AP classes and maybe on a track to go to Princeton. Or that teacher in Wyandotte County who their kids may go home to not even an adult in the house, no computers, no Wi-Fi, none of that, but he or she gets those kids to come to school every single day. Who's the meritorious teacher? So that kind of kept them a little bit on the quiet side. But one of the biggest critics of public education on the House Education Committee, and the one that was absolutely convinced that merit pay was the way to go, is no longer in the Kansas House of Representatives. He's in the Senate. He took somebody's spot in the Senate who left. I think it was J.R. Clay's spot in the Senate. So good luck in the Senate. Yeah. And anyway, that's kind of where we are with the 3 committees that I'm working on anyway. And we'll continue. I'm very enthused about the path to go forward with meeting with these different groups and really talking about inquiring rather than imposing. I think that's a way to go, and I think that that's an odd way to approach things. in the Kansas legislature a lot of times. Let's get a bunch of people who don't know what they're doing about education. Let's impose legislation on our educators and so on, rather than inquiring how we can help them and how we can make things better for public education and our kids and grandkids. So anyway, as we go down over the next 6 months, hopefully I'll have more detailed information, but that's kind of where we are right now. So I'll turn this over to Jess.
Thank you, Representative Stogsdill. Good morning, everyone. So nice to see you. I am Melanie Haas. I represent District 2 on the State Board of Education. That is the uppermost northeast corner of Johnson County and the entire southern half of Wyandotte County. So I represent a big chunk of Shawnee Mission schools, a little bit of Olathe, Blue Valley, Turner, and KCK. So that is my district. The state board is made up of 10 members. We meet once a month in Topeka by statute every month, no matter what, including December. I met a colleague from another state recently who's on their state board, and they said, we don't meet in December because nobody wants to show up because, holidays and stuff. And I thought, wouldn't that be great? And double checked. And yes, in fact, statute says every single month the state board must meet for 2 days. So that is what we do. You can find us on the second Tuesday and Wednesday. You can also find us on YouTube on KSDE Live Media. So you can watch our entire meeting. It's about 8 hours on Tuesday. And depending on the Wednesday, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 6. It just depends. And lately we've been adding some Monday retreats because we picked up some new board members in the last election and they don't have experience. Well, a few of them. One of them does have a lot of experience in education, but a couple of them don't. And so we're kind of constantly in a cycle where we're trying to make sure that all of our board members know what the work is and get a view of the field because they're usually constrained to wherever they're elected from and they don't know what's happening across the state. For instance, I don't know a whole lot about what's going on in rural areas unless I make that trip out to Western Kansas or somewhere very quiet and go and ask. And sometimes they invite us, which is great. But the job of the legislature is to fund our schools. They're responsible for the money side of education. The State Board of Ed is responsible for general oversight of public schools, which includes teacher licensure. And that means that we also accredit those college programs that decide what teachers need to be taught. And so to Representative Stogsdill's points, one of the things that we do is we look at what do those education programs look like that teachers are going through. What are they learning in college? Are they learning the right things? And then we do try to have those conversations. Actually, our State Department of Ed, they're the real experts. They have those conversations with the colleges and say, these are some of the changes we want to see. And so periodically those programs do get updated. And almost every month, if you watch our meeting, we are accrediting a new program. And so we'll actually go through college by college and look at the program specifically and decide whether or not we want to approve that. But I really want to start today. I'll start at the top with the Fed. I have some good news. In fact, my friends in the room, my colleagues might not even know this yet, but it sure looks like we might be getting some of our federal dollars that we thought we had lost permanently. This is a really big deal. I might have woken my kids up when I screamed out loud when I got the news. But I talked last month about how there was a lawsuit that several blue states joined, and they filed against the Department of Education and said, you promised us these dollars not months, years ago. We committed in Kansas, we committed our dollars to training teachers in the science of reading. You heard folks talk about literacy, and that is a big deal. And so we had committed those dollars, we were under contract, and then the Department of Education said, you know what, we're not gonna let you have the rest of that money, and yanked the rug right out from under the Department of Ed here in Kansas. We had no recourse, and we were, at that point then, running a deficit in the department of over $1 million, which is not legal. Our Attorney General could have come back and pointed the finger and said, you've had these bills due for more than 30 days, you can't do that. That was gonna be a huge problem for us. And so when that news came through, that was big. And I wanna read you the piece from the letter from Linda McMahon, which basically said, it has created basic fairness and uniformity issues. So the red states that chose not to sue didn't get their money. The blue states who chose to sue were going to get their money. And essentially the argument was, hey, wait a minute, why are we getting left out of this? So that's really big news for us right now. I'm really excited. I will believe it when I see it. We've got to actually get the money, which means we'll put in the request next week, and hopefully those dollars will be coming back to us. At the federal level, the Supreme Court yesterday came out with a ruling that said that they are going to allow families based on religious reasons to opt out of certain lessons. They weren't specific about how that's supposed to work. And they gave no guidance to states or districts about how that should work. So this could create some really interesting challenges. Everything from, I walk as a teacher. I was not a teacher, by the way, but if I was a teacher, I could walk into my 5th grade classroom and maybe something happened in the news overnight. And so first thing in the morning, I'm going to kind of teach on the fly. I have to be really careful what resources I pull, maybe even what media I read from, because if I'm potentially going to offend someone, that could create some problems. What does that do for books in the library? I'm not sure. I think this opens up a lot of questions, so that concerns me. You can be creative with that, I'm sure, so I will just leave that one there. And then moving to Kansas, we had 2 different stories over the last couple of weeks. The Kansas Attorney General does not seem to like the State Board of Education, and I can't figure out why, because he hasn't come and talked to us. So when we needed help with those ESSER dollars, our chair and our vice chair, by the way, both Republicans, couldn't seem to get a meeting with him. And then, the news comes out that he's decided that there's a complaint against 4 school districts who are essentially accused of illegal social transition policies. And there was no evidence that came with this complaint. He said these districts are doing this thing where they're letting kids transition and not telling their parents. And so if you look this up, it's the one that also says FERPA. And FERPA, I always have to read this, is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. I think of FERPA is the law that allows me as a parent to go to the school district and say, I would like to see my child's education record. Like, it gives me access to their record. And so he's essentially insinuating that there's something in the record that parents can't see, or that districts are doing something untoward, and he has no evidence. He's offered none that this is happening. And of course, it's some of the largest districts in our state, and they're all right here in the Johnson County and Wyandotte area, and I think one in Topeka. The other one that he came out with is he wants the State Board of Education to immediately deal with this huge problem where our school lunch contracts with vendors have some language in them that have a clause that mentions gender identity. That language is blanket language that is used at the state level. It's actually from a 2019 executive order that was issued by the governor, where they updated the language in the contracts for all state agencies at a time when I believe there was some anti-Semitism discrimination going on. So kind of waiting to get a little bit more information from our legal on that, but that sure looks like that's what this is about, is blanket language that every single department in the state is required to use when they write a contract with a vendor. But for some reason, he has come after the state board on that one as well. So I'm not sure what that's about. I will then jump to a little bit closer. So our state board meetings have slowed down a little bit. I've kind of talked about this. We're just not getting as much done because we're spending a little bit of extra time educating and doing some of those retreats. There was mention of Medicaid dollars, and I just want to point out that there has been a lot of talk lately about stripping away, and I would say this is at the Kansas legislative level, stripping away the access that schools have to use Medicaid as a way to pay for certain services. And that's actually called the Medicaid Replacement State Aid. It covers things like occupational therapy and physical therapy for special education students. It can also pay for some of the devices that they might need to have access to. And so on the Medicaid front, if that goes away, that's one more hit in addition to the vouchers or whatever you want to call them, and all of the other ways that they're kind of chipping away at funding for public education. That's just one more way that we're able to kind of help prop up our underfunded special education programs. And so if we lose that Medicaid access, that's going to hit our schools pretty hard. Last month at our board meeting, we had a vote on an anti-bullying, some anti-bullying language that we're going to require that all districts put on their websites so that students and parents and anyone supporting a student will be able to go to the website and immediately find, how do I report an instance of bullying that the child that I'm looking out for may be experiencing? So it's not a huge shift, but I just want to make sure that you know what we're voting on. And so that was one of the ones, as well as we did update our emergency substitute license. I keep calling it that because it's gone by several different names. So the folks in this room know it as eSub. It is the most accessible way of becoming a substitute. And it's the one that a couple of years ago, everybody said, oh, they're going to let 18-year-olds teach as subs. We did go ahead and approve updates to this license permanently. And so the license will now exist, which a lot of districts were asking, please make this permanent so that we don't have to keep coming back to you and asking for you to renew it. The thing that I mentioned this in the board meeting, and I've said it here, and I want to say it to you all again, this does not mean that just any 18-year-old can show up and get an emergency sub license. What this means is that anyone who has graduated from high school and has a few college hours under their belt could show up and say, I would like to be a substitute in your district. They have to meet the superintendent, and the superintendent has to sign off individually on every single applicant. And I had superintendents begging me to please vote to renew this, because when you look at those rural districts that have dozens of kids total, we have a lot of districts that have under 100 kids. And when you look at those districts that are already short on teachers, if you have a couple of teachers out sick, you need an emergency sub. It's like, who do we call quick? They may not have a very long list, but they might have some students who recently graduated, who are now in college to become teachers. They're looking at ways that they can get into the teaching pathway. That's one example, a real example that a superintendent gave. I want to be able, she said, to call these folks and have them come in because they've already been through the background check. You know, you have to get the license. You've got to get a background check and do all the work. And so that's just one example, but we have bus drivers who are signing up to be subs. They know the kids really well. They get to see them twice a day already. They're already driving to the school. It's a really wonderful opportunity for those districts to capture some of those people that they already know. And so I reminded again during the board meeting, hey, these superintendents are the ones on the hook. If somebody's hearing about a bad sub, the superintendent is the one who is responsible for making sure that they're putting good folks in those classrooms. So I am really optimistic about this license. I got a lot of thanks from superintendents across the state. We've got 285 districts in this state. They all have very different needs. And yeah, we've got some kids that travel over 40 minutes one way to get to school because that's how far their closest school is. I've talked a little bit about consolidation of districts before, and so that's something that I continue to be focused on as well. So I will hand it over to the next person and happy to take questions later.
Hello, my name is Becky Fast, and I'm on the Johnson County Commission. If you live in Northeast Johnson County, I represent you. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about this past legislative session. We have a government relations and we have a lobbyist in Topeka, and they looked at all the bills coming through the legislature. Over 60% of the bills impacted local government in some way. I mean, that is just really fascinating. Our legislature always talks about they don't want federal control, about the amount of bills that was going to impact us at the local level. So we're always watching the legislature constantly and also federal impacts. Only 20% of the bills introduced were passed. So that's the good news. So not all 60% of these bills were actually passed. So the state legislature says every county government, they have 18 services that county government needs to implement. There are 18 mandated services. So county governments are administrative arms of the state. Cities are not. But many of these services, we don't get full funding. We don't even get half funding. If you go to the DMV right now to get your license tag, there is long lines. We have such growth in Johnson County, and we're not meeting the need. But yet there is a number of fees on that license tag, but 80% goes to the state. So we don't even get to keep the fees to do the services. So we're really struggling providing that service. A service that's really critical is our Johnson County Developmental Services. It serves individuals and families with intellectual and development disabilities. So this service hasn't been in the county, across the nation for many decades. When my brother was born in the early 60s, there was no community supports if you were a family or if you were a person with an intellectual or developmental disability. So when my brother was born with Down syndrome, my parents were told by their doctor that they needed to put him in a state institution. He would not live long. He has Down syndrome. Put him in an institution. They will care for them. So my mother, a teacher, said no way in hell after we went and looked at these state institutions. But we also, my family discovered there was no community supports, and I lived in a rural area. So it was through many families like my parents who advocated to their county commissioners or school boards that children with special needs should be able to go to school. But what was landmark was Medicaid. Medicaid really changed for families. And so when my brother graduated from high school, he was one of the first person to be able to go to a group living situation because my parents and I, and which got my love of advocacy, spent many hours with state legislature, local officials, that Medicaid should provide home care services. So when Medicaid first started, it was just for nursing homes. It was just for hospitals. It wasn't for home-based Medicaid services. And so that was really landmark that he got to go live in a group home where he lives now, and he turned 60 years old, and when they told him he would never make it to 60 years old. And he has caregivers, in his house, and that's through Medicaid support services. It's also through his Social Security disability. And so many families like myself, I'm now his legal guardian, are very worried about the cuts to Medicaid. And, what is his other option? It is a nursing home, which is much higher. So Kansas legislature last year, there was like a 10-year waiting list to get home-based Medicaid services, 10 years for families. But Kansas legislature last year put $10 million in to reduce that waiting list and increase provider rates, which was huge. And they've been working on that for several years. And many of my brother's caregivers, they were going to McDonald's to make more money. So these are just angel people who make, $12 and $13. So by increasing the Medicaid rates, provider rates, he can have the same caregiver for a longer time because they can stay there and have a livable wage. So that was good news in the legislature, but we're really worried at the federal level because the disability service system is very fragile. I mean, you have many workers barely making it, many nonprofits barely making it, and those cuts, Kansas, so in Kansas, the federal government pays 60% of a Medicaid dollar, Kansas pays 40%. So if the state says, well, we're not going to do 60%, we're going to only do 40%, well, then Kansas has to pick up 60%. And I don't see Kansas picking up that, they don't have the budgetary ability to pick that up. And so the other part that, Senator Corson was talking about, the cuts at the federal level, they're also been increasing the eligibility to get Medicaid. This past summer when I did my brother's Medicaid eligibility, now I have 2 master's degree and I about had an anxiety attack doing his Medicaid eligibility application and, almost like had to take the week off from work because I get the application, it's due in 4 days, 4 days to gather all his information. Now he used to be just like, I just had to, give a few different documents. Now it's up to this much. And, he has had Down syndrome since he was born. His condition has not changed. His psychological assessment for mental retardation is what the official diagnosis has not changed. He works a little bit each month. I missed 1 pay stub, so they almost denied it, which I about had a heart attack. Before, if you missed one, they can see, he makes less than $12,000 a year with Social Security. And they have those documents. So for the average family, trying to get all that documentation in a week, and if you're, the working poor, it's getting to be very difficult. Then I overnighted it, $60. How many people can afford the overnight fee of $60? So not only I'm very worried about the cuts, I'm worried about how many families or persons won't be able to meet that eligibility documentation. I had a really good Medicaid worker who told me I missed this documentation. Some people don't. So that, I really see the uninsured rate for those with mental health needs, our mental health center, anybody who walks through the door, our mental health center serves, but we also need that Medicaid to help float our mental health center. So one of the good news is Johnson County Developmental Supports. We have a Friends of the Developmental Supports who help raise money to open up houses for for residents with developmental disabilities. And this month, we opened up our 24th house in Merriam, Kansas. It's called the KSU House. It has a purple door because it was built by Kansas State students. And 3 adult women are moving in, and they're just jumping with joy that they have a house. And what was so exciting to me is the neighborhood just opened up with warm arms for this, for these residents to move into their community. We don't see that all over Johnson County. We also have a kind of apartment complex that we've been working on. The Friends Group has, Johnson County Commission, we appropriated some federal funds to it. And so it's going to be like 15 units in downtown Overland Park, because many people with Down syndrome or intellectual disability cannot drive. They need to walk. So they need a walkable neighborhood. And downtown Overland Park will be an incredible neighborhood for them. So I'm very excited about that. Last, I wanted just to highlight World Cup. This last week, the county commission and elected officials had a press conference with the countdown clock. It is 1 year to World Cup. If you go to the Union Station, you'll see the countdown clock. There was a fan festival in Overland Park to sign up volunteers. They're going to need like 9,000 volunteers. It's next summer. It starts the World Cup from mid-June to mid-July. There's 11 host cities. Kansas City is the smallest of all the host cities. They're expecting 600,000 people to Johnson County, the area, that's not just us, but we will have around 11,000 hotel rooms. People are already reserving hotel rooms in Johnson County, which is incredible to me. So they're going to need a lot of volunteers. The average visitor stays like 9 to 10 days that comes, to the area for the FIFA games, which is pretty incredible. So we got a grant working with Overland Park and Lenexa. We'll have a bus that goes from the airport, goes to Lenexa City Center, the Overland Park Convention Center, and it will go back and forth to bring visitors in and bring back. We're working on a circular route that a bus, and these are, so we've reserved already, these are small kind of 35 passenger buses because we reserved it last year because there is not going to be a bus left pretty soon across the nation to reserve because there's 11 cities hosting these games. And so if you want to fly next summer, you better get your ticket now because the flight cost, flying is going to be expensive because so many people are coming to the U.S. England has said they would like to be in one of our base camps, which is good news. That means, if England is coming, if they get one of the base camps, there's 3 base camps, and that means teams are practicing and always fans locate by where their team is. There's also, Iran is also one of the qualifying. And as we know, if Iran would be one of our teams, they would not have fans here. So there's that also overlying about all these countries on the ban list. So you could have teams like Germany and England and get a lot of visitors, or you could have several teams that are on the ban list and not get as many visitors to your region. So Johnson County, the whole metro region, is working diligently because we have 1 year to go to put on this, welcoming the world to our region, to know Kansas City and to be a part of this major international sports competition. So I will hand it over to Rep. Clayton.
Thank you, Commissioner. I feel kind of bad for going last because we have all of these wonderful uplifting messages from our local government, and then it's like, oh no, it's back to the legislature again. So, but I apologize. I got here a little late and I needed to kind of get my notes together to talk a little bit about what I wanted to update you on. So this will be kind of a how I'm going to spend my summer vacation. And so it's interesting. Representative Stogsdill and Senator Corson mentioned our interim committees and how a lot of those will not be starting until September. I will tell you, just to kind of go over some of the committees that I'm on for those of you that are not familiar with it. First of all, I represent the area from Metcalf to State Line, 83rd to 103rd. Unless you're east of Mission, and then the northern boundary is Somerset, and the southern boundary is 95th. So think Southern Prairie Village, Eastern Overland Park, and Old Leawood. And I serve on a number of committees. I am the ranking minority member on the Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development Committee. I am also a member of the Tax Committee. And I serve on the Federal and State Affairs Committee. That is the one that handles a lot of the controversial stuff. I know way too much about liquor and gun law. But that's kind of the way it goes. If we ever do anything related to cannabis, it is likely to come through that committee, but not with this Senate president, especially since he's running for governor. So just giving you guys a preview on that. Don't expect much coming up this next legislative session on that matter. And I am the vice chair of our only bipartisan committee, which is the Rules and Journal Committee. And that is a very wonky parliamentarian committee. So huge nerd committee, but tremendously important, especially when we go through a lot of our work and our debate when we are actually on the House floor. For interim committees, I was appointed to our interim commerce committee. Some of the subject matters we will be looking at are interesting. Talking a little bit more about cryptocurrency. So I kind of know where that comes from. One of my legislative colleagues in the House is quite the crypto bro, and I think we see that a little bit at the federal level. It is probably important for us to start looking at that a little bit more. I'm kind of surprised that it's not coming up more in like an FI&I or Financial Institutions Committee, because that makes a little bit more sense. We will also be looking at licensure reciprocity, as well as just deregulating in general. And so this is where what I do on my summer vacation comes into play. So a lot of times what I do is I spend a lot of time with constituents. I don't know if any of you have dogs or like walking dogs. I have a very large and boisterous black lab named Olive who loves walking. I like to take her on walks in Meadowbrook Park. So if anyone wants to meet me and walk your dogs together and talk policy, I will do that. But you know what? Olive likes to run, so you gotta walk fast. But also, I like to just spend time helping constituents out in general, but I attend a number of conferences. And so I am the state director for the Women in Government, or, Kansas State Director for Women in Government. And so, the name, don't let the name fool you. I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? It is women legislators. And so I attended that conference about a week and a half ago. A lot of the information that I got there was fairly fascinating, and it was pertinent to the Commerce Committee on which I serve. So we heard from a group called United We, which used to be the Women's Foundation. It is a group that's kind of based in Kansas City, but it has several other areas that it focuses, but mostly here. And it used to focus primarily on what they call the Appointments Project, which is appointing women to various boards and commissions to sort of start that pipeline to get women to run for office. Apparently, most women, you have to ask them to run for office 9 times before they feel worthy enough to do it. That was not the case with me, but I'm not normal. So don't pay attention to me. But in any cases, so the way that you do that is that you get a lot of women more comfortable with serving on boards and commissions and uplift them. But at least in my opinion, unfortunately, this group has shifted more to deregulating licensure requirements because they see the costs of licensure and the education that's required as burdensome to women, right? Because a lot of women are doing things like cosmetology licenses, childcare licenses, things like that. But, I've talked to you all about this a little bit. I think that licensure and education and regulations are important and are good for the economy. Are they difficult? Yes. But we want things to be difficult for a reason, because the most important thing that makes us feel safe when it comes to spending our money for goods and services is to know that those goods and services are not going to hurt us or the vulnerable people in whom we are, placing in their charge. I want to make sure, for instance, that the people that I ask to watch my boisterous dog have background checks so that I can come home to a similarly healthy and boisterous dog. You're darn right that I feel that way about my children, although, they're both too old to have childcare, thank goodness. That cost is finally passed. But I feel that way about my constituents. And even though the children that I represent can't vote, you're darn right that I feel responsible for them. And so while I always like to look at regulations and make sure that, all right, that we're not getting too crazy with it, I'm very much middle of the road in that regard, and I do not think that a massive slash and burn for deregulations really comes into play. So sort of, giving the side eye to that presentation to a group of women legislators saying, this is how we empower women, again, it kind of brought to mind, and I'm going to get bipartisan on you here, so just forgive me for this, but do you remember when No Child Left Behind was first put into place? And then President George W. Bush talked about, he used a phrase called the soft bigotry of low expectations. And that was just implying, oh, well, we're just going to assume that you can't reach these various achievements. Just because Kansas residents are women doesn't mean that they can't get those certifications, doesn't mean that they can't get the education, doesn't mean that they can't do the work just as much as any man can. And so I don't like that soft bigotry of low expectations. I don't stand for that kind of thing. And I will continue to push against deregulation in the name of feminism. I know what feminism is, and it's not that. So another conference that I will plan on attending that will help me do some more research, especially as the ranking on commerce, is the American Legislative Exchange Council. Yeah, really? Also known as ALEC. And okay, so it's kind of wild because you all will look and be like, wait, why is she going? Is she starting to turn to the other side? And it's like, well, no, I've been on the other side, guys. I know what it's like over there. I like it just fine over here. But research is tremendously important. I went to ALEC last summer, and I always go, there's another Democratic representative. He's a guy. We have each other's backs, so I don't go by myself or anything like that. But I like to go and I like to sit and watch and learn, because verily I say unto thee, it is a preview of the bills that we will see to come in the fall. And it's a very good opportunity to research and to strategize, because every once in a while you can talk to some of these folks and say, all right, I see where you're coming from here. This is actually not a bad idea, but perhaps when you file it in Kansas, we can make it a little bit more of a fit for Kansas. And through that, sometimes we can take some of the more dangerous or irrational teeth out of that type of legislature. It's an interesting point of strategy that I choose to follow, but to be perfectly honest, any of us can count, and we know that right now, we are not necessarily as well represented as we would like to be. And the best way to get things done is by making sure that one is working with the other side. This gives some interesting previews to one of the things that Art Laffer, who was a panelist there, so it's like, I'm glad he wasn't, drawing economic policy on a napkin, because we all saw how that turned out in the Brownback years. But instead, he was talking about bringing up preschool vouchers. And sure enough, that has come up in some of our interim education committees. And so by finding out that information and by, thank goodness I was a theater kid, guys, because, I was able to present myself calmly and rationally and rip my hair out later in private. But it is a good way to get the work done. And so I will be doing the hard time in Indianapolis at the ALEC conference, basically. I think that's the second to last week in July. I will also be attending the National Council of State Legislators conference in Boston. And there I am on I think I used to be on the Tax and Budget Committee. Now I'm on the Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development Committee. And those conferences put you to work as well. It is a great outpouring of a lot of information. And I've been able to find out a lot of good ways to get things through in what I call a red state solution by talking to other legislators from red states that are similar in makeup to Kansas to find out, all right, how were you able to get this policy done? So I love my job. I'm always working, even when it's summer. I know I'm tan. I know it's weird that I'm not knocking doors. That's usually how I get it. But I'm really grateful to be here with you all today. And I think I'm the last one. So when it comes to questions, this is always my favorite part. This is where I learn the most. And I hope you guys are doing okay. It's been a lot of news. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. And, I'll awkwardly end it here. Senator?
All right, we'll go. I mean, I know some folks need to leave. We'll stick around. We can go till about 10:30, and then glad to talk to folks afterwards. But that first one always scares me though, because that's somebody who's been sitting there the whole time, like waiting for this. So that first one is always a little scary.
You should be scared. Hi, Ethan. Thank you, guys. It was, as always, super useful. And, there's so many things to ask. So I do want to make sure in your answers you tell us a little bit what Stephanie was just saying, which is, how are you, right? Like Ethan, well, it was a perfect circle because Ethan started out with, a really rough start to the month. And both those murders touch me as well, and I'm not serving, but they touch parts of my community. I wanted to bring to your attention a couple of things, and it overlays all the topics, and it has to do with how we stand up and do. Like you guys go to work and you're doing on our behalf, but all of us have a responsibility to do, and I've alluded to that before in questions. And my concern this month happened to come, I've talked to you about AI, right? The feds are trying to stop for 10 years any possibility of you all even talking about AI, legislating AI. And I know about you guys, but it's already changed a lot of how I have to approach certain topics and things. So those kinds of problems are things I want you to stay to. They're, that it'll affect us in election law and other things. But I worked really hard this month to try and figure out how to lower our consumption of electricity, which is the best way to lower the problems that we're having in green energy. But the second possibility is that we could advance solar. And it could be that I try to do it on my house. It's not cost efficient in Kansas. The legislature has hamstrung us, and Kansas Corporation doesn't allow us to recoup much. And so the best way is for us to advance solar farms and wind to some extent, and hydro and other things. I'd like you to sort of think about how we can help, because I don't really know how any of us can use the tools that are supposedly there for us that aren't working for us. Kansas Corporation Commission being one of them, even with some of Governor Kelly's appointees. And so it's a broad question of sort of the doing part and the onus, the support we can give you as constituents, as doers, not just asking you questions and getting the information, which we do every month when we come, but sort of sending us back out with some supports, because it's really rough. There's a rate increase coming, not for KC Metro yet, but for the rest of Kansas. And I think it will come back to us, and it's as much as $13 a month for residents. That's gonna be really unaffordable. And Panasonic's off the table because they already cut their deal. And Evergy made $800 million this year in profit, but they still want more money from us. So it's an open sort of question.
So I'll take a stab at it. I'm sure my colleagues have probably smarter things to say about it than I do. But the thing that I continue to urge folks to do is try to get out of our bubbles of folks who are in this highly engaged, highly informed group, right? If you're here today, you're highly engaged, you're highly informed, you're following what's going on. What I was humbled by when I was campaigning last year is just the number of people whose doors you would knock on, great people, working hard, well-meaning, raising families, and I would say, hey, I'm your state senator, here's some things about me, I'm running for re-election, what questions do you have for me, what's going on? And the number of people would just say, look, I really appreciate you being here. I think it says a lot that you're here on my doorstep, but I don't even know what the issues are at the state legislative level. I've maybe heard a little bit about what's going on nationally, but I really don't even know what I should be asking you. And it struck me because, again, I think we are often in these bubbles where everybody that we interact with is also highly engaged and informed and knows about these issues. So what I've been encouraging folks to do is to try to talk to folks in their spheres, whether that's colleagues, whether that's family members, whether that's neighbors, especially I would say neighbors, whether if you have school-aged children or grandchildren, parents or grandparents, just folks that you meet. And I think the way to do it is not, this party is good and this party is bad, but I think it's talking about, hey, did you know that this issue is happening? And here's how I think it would positively or negatively affect our community. I think that's a better approach to get people engaged. I think the more that we can just share information and make people aware of things that are going on and how that they're impacting our community, I just think we're all better off for that. So that's kind of my plug.
I appreciate the question that you asked. I want to address the thing that you said first about, asking us how we were. Guys, I represent constituents who risk their lives every single day at work. Frankly, we all risk our lives every single time we leave the house. I represent people who work in law enforcement, who work in security. I represent teachers who could get mown down in a school shooting. So don't worry about me. I'm cool. Just don't shoot my dog. That's all I ask. So, and then as far as the rest, I think one of the things that Senator Corson spoke to was just the way that we have our conversations. I think that the most important advocacy by far is what I call the back fence chat. And so a lot of times people might bring up, hey, this is what's going on at the federal level, but what I would like you all to do, because you all are hyper engaged folks, remember how a lot of you bring your notebooks, is visit with your neighbors about, see how they're feeling about property taxes, see how they're feeling just about costs at the grocery store, those sorts of things in general. Bring a friend the next time you come, although it's like, again, I can't blame you guys for not showing up every Saturday, right? But that sort of thing, spreading that knowledge that you all have is the best way to do it in everyday normal conversation.
Yeah, those are all good ideas. And I think if you're really interested in environmental issues like hydroelectric power, wind power, all that sort of thing, I've been a member of the Sierra Club and the Nature Conservancy for over 30 years. And both of those organizations work on exactly those kinds of issues. And I would highly encourage people who are interested in that to get involved with those organizations and work with them as well as your legislators and state representatives and so on. So just an idea.
I don't usually jump in on these legislative questions, but I want to point out in the category of did you know, on the AI front, not all students are the same. And our young people, as a large group, are very concerned about our environment right now. And our young people are noticing how much energy AI uses. And so not all of them are jumping online and asking AI to do their homework. In fact, many of them are pushing it away and saying, I don't want anything to do with this. So on the education side, we have a really interesting challenge ahead of us where we need some AI literacy.
All right, I think we're ready for the next one, and then we'll go to Dr. Hellman after that.
Certainly the elephant in the room next session is what the federal government does and what the legislature will be confronted with. But another elephant, I think, is Ty Masterson running for governor and Dan Hawkins running for insurance commissioner. How will those two campaigns impact the upcoming session?
Yeah, I guess I would defer to colleagues who've been through more statewide elections with leaders running. Was talking to somebody, ran in randomly to somebody at Q39, and they said, Speaker Hawkins, who actually I have a good relationship with on a personal level. They said that when he announced for insurance commissioner, he said all of his materials said pro-life, pro-gun, pro-Trump. And the person said, I mean, that's all fine and well, but those are three issues that have nothing to do with the Kansas Department of Insurance. And so I just worry about that. So that kind of gave me, I think, a preview, but other folks have probably been in the legislature with leadership running for stuff.
Okay, so normally, what's going to happen, and we also have some extra fun in the Kansas House because we have two of our House colleagues who are running to replace Secretary Schwab, who is running for governor instead of running for Secretary of State again. I don't know why he's doing that, but in any case, so the Secretary of State position will be open, and we have Representative Pat Proctor and Representative Ken Rajas, who are both running for that seat in a Republican primary. So basically what it means is that when you have people who are in leadership and people who are just legislative members, is that it gets really weird and everyone wants to get session done as quickly as possible so that we can all get out of there. That's part of the reason why we had such a short session this time, so that Hawkins and Masterson could go raise money. It will be even shorter this time, which in some ways might be good because the longer we're there, the more interesting policy decisions get introduced, but it's not necessarily good from a tax and budget standpoint. So I don't like that, but that's basically the effect it will have. That and lots of long speeches we have to listen to, but fortunately you do not.
Yeah, just real quickly, I'm somewhat optimistic about the coming session because I think that a lot of the issues that they have supported over the years and even in this last session are very unpopular with the majority of Kansans. Kansans want Medicaid expansion. Kansas wants good schools. They don't want vouchers, all that sort of thing. And I think they're going to be hard-pressed to really emphasize those kinds of issues in an upcoming election where every member of the House is going to be up for election and no, it won't be part of the Senate, but at least the House. So I think that maybe if there's anything that's going to moderate the issues that we deal with this year, it will be because of the election and their understanding that their positions that they can get away with in Topeka, maybe they can't get away with statewide with voters. So we'll hope that's the case anyway.
I'd like to comment briefly. First of all, I thought all five of you gave us terrific information. I really appreciate that. Really. I want to follow up on things that Ethan and Becky were talking about and talk about the human cost of it. As a physician, I'm keenly aware of the fact that when a rural hospital gets into trouble, one of the things it does is it tries to survive by charging what we call full freight or undiscounted charges for the people that they serve, particularly people who have no insurance. So when you strip away Medicaid and Medicare, for instance, one of the things you strip away is the contract for discounted services. So a fracture of the lower leg might cost me $300 if I had insurance, and it might cost me $15,000 to $25,000 if I had none. And the consequence is what happens when the rural hospital gets into trouble. It bankrupts the people around it. And the human cost is you have a choice between either losing the hospital, bankrupting the people, or having people die or be in terrible distress because their disease is much worse, their injury is much worse, because they're waiting to the last moment because they know a little bit about this. And it is the human cost that I think is the biggest issue for Kansas. And the consequence, I think, really has to be highlighted by you folks and others when we're talking about it, because it's not just the fact that a hospital is closing, it's that what happens is you have bankrupted people and you have sicker people. And I know as a doctor, when someone waits, the problem that was easy to take care of becomes more severe, more distressful. And that's, I think, what we're facing. We're facing a real crisis.
Yeah, I think that was tremendously well said. I would just add to that that in a lot of our smaller communities in Kansas, the hospitals are also the largest employer. And so that's not just doctors and nurses, but that's all the people that are associated with that hospital. That is, people who answer the phones, who work at the front desk, who do janitorial services, who work in the cafeteria. I mean, so if you go to a lot of places in Kansas, that is actually the biggest employer they have. And so when you lose that, you get in a little bit of a death spiral when you lose that hospital. The other challenge is that you start to lose people at both ends of the population. You start to lose young people because young people who are thinking about starting families don't want to be in a place where they're going to be going through a pregnancy, where they're not going to be able to get the kind of healthcare services that they want in their area. And then older people want to leave because they feel like they're not going to be able to get the more specialized care that they need as they age. So it becomes a real death spiral for rural Kansas. And I think it's really important for all of us to try to use our voices to push back against that. And let's just do one more, and then we can do any others afterwards.
I went to the event at Unity last Sunday where Ken Martin, our new chair of the Democratic Party, was. I know I saw Ethan there. I'm sure there were others there. One of the things I really came away with, first of all, I think Ken has a really good perspective on how to build the Democratic Party, and it doesn't mean what's going on in Washington, D.C. so much. But one of the things he said was that going and talking to people 3+ weeks before an election, and then you talk to them and you want their vote, and then they don't see you, and then 2 years later you're back at it, really made an impact on me, because I know, we come to these sessions and we get the information and we go and we protest and we canvass for the elections, and it's so much more than the elections. It's those daily conversations that we have to have, not just focused on elections. And I thought more about it as I left about, I try to consume all this information. I know I prioritize it in my head. When I talk to people, I maybe talk about what I feel is the most important thing out there. And totally, I need to be more aware of it's not what I think, it's what the other person thinks. And talking with them, let them talk about what's the most important thing to them first, as you were mentioning. But I think I get in a trap of all this knowledge and all this information and ready to share it. And it might be a barrier to the person that you're talking to, that we need to let them start talking about what's on their mind. And actually, it's probably tangential of what they say, that something I know about is related to that, and we can have a conversation. And just really need to get out there between elections and do it every day and just make it part of our life. And I thought it was a really good point that he made, and wanted to share that because I've thought a lot about what he has said since Sunday. So.
I will say this, that this is work that is important regardless of what party you identify with, regardless of what side of the aisle. It's just a common thread of respect. And I think you were talking about the amount of information that we get. I mean, geez, I'm so guilty of doom scrolling, seriously. And a lot of times, I don't think that the human mind is meant to be inundated with that. I think some of the best things that we can do is just that regular connection. And it sounds, like hokey, like, oh, I talk to people at the tennis courts about it. But I legit talk to people that I play tennis with about these policies. You can talk to people about it at the grocery store. It's just the human contact, the conversation, and threading it through with respect and listening. You've got it. You're doing it right. So just keep doing it. And I agree. I think we should do it all year, every day.
Well, those are great words to end on. So let's end there. Thank you so much for being here at our town hall. We'll be back next month on the 4th Saturday in July. But again, thank you for giving us some of your time, and we really appreciate it. Take care. Be safe.